Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pathy Foundation Fellowship presentations this week. We are very happy to have you all here to join us online for this week's presentations as we, the fellows, take you on a journey through our individual fellowship experience and share the many stories and impacts our initiatives have had on ourselves and the communities we work with. My name is Giovanni, and I am pleased to be your MC for Jessica Franko's final fellowship presentation. I'm a St. FX grad and am currently finishing up my fellowship in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. And I have had the privilege of getting to know Jessica over the past year. Today's event will consist of a 15-minute presentation followed by Q&A afterwards, which I will moderate for all our viewers tuning in today. Jessica Franko holds a BAH Medial in Global Development and Political Studies from Queen's University. This year, she returned to Maun, Botswana to work on her fellowship project alongside two adult empowerment groups in the village of Gonastoka and Betsa. The group's corporate partners, Wilderness Safari, and once again, to work alongside Travel for Impact. In 2017, Jessica was introduced to the intricacies of community development as an international intern at Travel for Impact, a local NGO in Botswana which links the tourism industry to community-based initiatives. It was during her internship that she was first introduced to the Okavango Livelihoods project and began to deepen her appreciation for grassroots development. The project she worked on this year is aimed at diversifying livelihoods within the tourism value chain in the Okavango Delta Panhandle. Among other income generation activities, beekeeping is the primary focus. In simplest terms, the project supports a number of supplemental income activities which will supply goods both to the community and to the group's tourism partners, creating meaningful employment and community engagement within the tourism industry. Introducing an asset-based, community-driven development approach to the project and working through relationship building and organizational elements were main highlights of the fellowship timeline. I recall a conversation during a video call with myself and Jessica where she was explaining some of her workshops and the feedback she had received in her ABCD workshop, where she faced very real barriers but successfully navigated them, and in that demonstrated her patience and understanding of the various intersections of tourism and community development that make it something worth fostering and celebrating. It is as a result of these numerous conversations I have had with Jessica, such as this one, that caused me to be excited to moderate and have Jessica Franko presenting her fellowship experience for us today. So just a quick reminder that throughout Jessica's presentation, we encourage you to make comments and ask questions in the comment section of either Zoom or the Facebook live stream. I will be watching these feeds and collating comments and questions, and at the end of Jessica's presentation, we will moderate a 15 to 20-minute Q&A. Jessica is a true leader that creates a safe and open environment for others through her attention to detail and sincere interest in what you have to say. I've been lucky to have had the opportunity to learn from Jessica's leadership capabilities and see her passion for change through community development that is both inspiring and educating. I'm very proud to be able to call Jessica my friend and to grow through my conversations with her. So without further ado, I will pass the virtual mic over to our presenter. So take it away, Jessica.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Gio, for that really beautiful introduction. And thank you as well to everyone who's been able to join the call today. I really appreciate you coming to learn about this transformational learning that I've done this year, which has certainly been unprecedented in my life. So this year I had the immense honor of returning back to Botswana to work on the Okavango Livelihoods project with some incredible partners, splitting my time between Maun, Botswana, where I was located at Travel for Impact, and also where the Wilderness Safari's office is located, and also between the Okavango Panhandle, where the adult empowerment groups are located and where the project site was. So I was introduced to this project in 2017 as a Travel for Impact intern when this project was still very much within its proposal stage. And The project has always been led and initiated by one of Travel for Impact's travel partners, Wilderness Safaris, in conjunction with 2 adult empowerment groups in the villages of Gunutsocha and Betsa. So this project operates within the scope of tourism, which is particularly important and relevant in the context in Botswana, because as one of the major economies, there's now a drive to increase opportunities for meaningful community engagement and to unpack what that really looks like within the tourism industry. And so that's been a major theme this year in the project, because this project is one of those efforts to broaden those opportunities for communities to find meaningful engagement and also to diversify livelihoods within the tourism value chain. So all of this is very much aligned to what Travel for Impact does. And although this project wasn't specifically a Travel for Impact project, creating meaningful avenues for partnerships between community and safari companies within the tourism industry was an overarching aim in both this project and at Travel for Impact. And so my internship with TFI in 2017 also really helped me to prepare for this new role this year. So with that brief introduction, today I want to dive into more of that project context and start a discussion about my educational background and how that has influenced this journey, as well look at some of those project activities, the approach that we used for the project, and then look at sustainability and what that has looked like with COVID-19 implications, and also finish off with some key personal learnings and acknowledgements. As was mentioned in my beautiful introduction by Gio, I attended Queen's University and studied global development. And like many before me in a theoretical degree, I became very disillusioned by the lack of agency that I felt in addressing the systems of injustice and inequity that I was learning about and critiquing. So I felt very much that my studies left all of the room for what's wrong with development and very little room for how we move beyond those patterns and evolve beyond that. And so when I went to Travel for Impact in 2017, it was an intensely reflective experience for me as I started to work through that corrosive cynicism that was becoming normalized throughout my university experience and education. And so that shift in my thinking about development really happened as a result of seeing that tangible impact and change that was happening on the ground through Travel for Impact's work. And working on the Okavango Livelihoods project as part of that experience, I also continued to be inspired by the immense potential that exists in Botswana ready to be mobilized. And so with that passion and hopefulness for where development can grow to, I felt working at Travel for Impact, and also my belief in the potential of this specific project, that's really where my motivation came from to apply to the Ocean Path Fellowship. And so that second fundamental shift in my view of development came beyond university and beyond my internship with Travel for Impact, when we were introduced to asset-based community-driven development in our Foundation for Community Change training through the fellowship. So ABCD is a process which focuses on drawing out the pre-existing strengths, resources, skills, and opportunities within a community and working through that process to identify, inventory, plan, and mobilize those skills that already exist. So this process really helps to shift decision-making from a top-down model back down to a community level so that processes and projects become community-led and community-owned. And so in a traditional model where you'll see external solutions and deficits or needs as being the starting point for project design, more often than not, that usually manifests in feelings within the community of internalized disempowerment and the perpetuation of dependency-based thinking. In ABCD, it really turns that traditional model up on its head, and the process helps to unpack how community members are not only capable of initiating and implementing and leading change, but are actually within their context the best equipped to do so. And so this new approach to development really, really resonated with me when we learned about it in the fellowship program. And the ABCD process was really the most impactful opportunity for my own growth and the biggest shift in my own development view, but it was also within the project the biggest opportunity for lasting impact within the project. I finally felt like ABCD offered that answer to that question that I had been thinking for 4 years in a global development degree of what replaces this traditional model of development that I've been learning about and critiquing all through university. And so ABCD moving into this project really enabled me to be more responsive and adaptive to the community feedback once I arrived in Botswana. And prior to arriving to Botswana, when we were going through the motions of fellowship training, the project updates that I was receiving about how the project had evolved since that first proposal in 2017 really highlighted that the groups were not in a production phase yet, and that the income generation activities like beekeeping and milling were at a standstill. And so when I initially returned to Botswana, I anticipated that much of that proposal from 2017 could still be mobilized, as much was still in a very stalemate stage and waiting to move forward. So those activities in that proposal looked like business scoping and technical beekeeping support, market access, and product development. But when I arrived in Botswana with this new lens of development, I hit the ground in September, and within my first partner meetings, the feedback that I was receiving was far more negative than I had anticipated about the challenges that everyone was facing in meeting project expectations and in maintaining participation levels, and just in the general dysfunction that had grown between all of the project partners. So it really became clear from that feedback that moving the groups to a production phase too early would be much of the same failure to launch issues that the project had been experiencing for the past 2 years. And so we, as a team, decided that we needed to pivot, and that's what we did. And so in talking with the partners about what ABCD was in those first few meetings with them, we decided that there would be massive potential in this project for what ABCD could offer in terms of relationship building and that capacitation need that hadn't been addressed over the last 2 years. And so pictured here is a timeline of what that gradual introduction to ABCD looked like for us, with relationship building being the first step and those introduction meetings and baselines being where we started. And this stage was really about collecting feedback and familiarizing ourselves with each other, and also testing some preliminary ABCD tools before leading up to our ABCD workshop. So here is one of those tools called the Leaky Bucket. And we used this as a financial literacy tool and participatory tracking tool. And we conducted this baseline in those first meetings as at 3 levels: at the household level, at the adult empowerment group level, and at the village level. And that was really to demonstrate the interconnections between all 3 economies and to show that an increase in income in the adult empowerment group project definitely affects the household level and also the community at large. And so this tool that we used was definitely a group favorite throughout our sessions. And our next step after those preliminary meetings and capturing our baselines was developed in consultation with one of my Cody mentors, Yogesh, who just has profound knowledge and experience in economic empowerment and community development. And so after updating him on where the project stood when I arrived after those first few meetings, he gave the very sage advice to bring everyone together, all of the project partners together, and do a project visioning that was a collaborative process that would also act as a stepping stone between that relationship building phase and moving into the ABCD workshop. So in that workshop, we backtracked to identify where the miscommunications had come from between wilderness and the empowerment groups. And then moving forward, we also documented new and collaboratively defined project roles and expectations to decrease the likelihood of future miscommunications to occur. And so we also started our conflict mediation circles in this workshop, and we also did our first action planning. And all of this gradual work that had taken place over the first 5 months or so in community led up to our ABCD workshop. And so that was a 5-day workshop with sessions on leadership and development hierarchy, levels of community engagement, and then a slow movement through ABCD, first as a concept and then as a process, and then looking at it into practice. What does this look like for this project? And we did that through the use of some contextually adapted resources and case studies, really looking at how we build our assets, how we identify them, inventorying those through the project sessions, and then seeing how they can be mobilized in a way that would be relevant to the project. And so the best part of this redeveloped timeline, or this use of an ABCD mindset or approach throughout the fellowship, was that it made the process much more participatory from the beginning, and none of the planning happened in isolation. So the process was and definitely needed to be collaborative from the start for the process to work. And so ABCD enabled us to do that. And pictured here are some action shots from our ABCD workshop. So on the top left, you can see the BETSA group, and in that photo, they're updating their physical asset map from their baseline that we had done earlier on in the year. Below that, you can see the Gunasocha group updating their same baseline. And so the physical map, we saw real tangible increase in participation just by looking at the update, comparing the baseline to that update. And we saw a lot of really great results come from that increase of participation. On the top right, that's a breakout group discussing contextual examples of ABCD happening in the villages in a storytelling activity. And then below that is the whole group coming together to review a seasonal calendar that they had created together, which shows what parts of the year resources are available. And then that discussion that they're having is comparing those patterns to project activity patterns. And so ABCD was by and large the most impactful tool that was used throughout the fellowship. And it enabled the partners and I to be much more cognizant and appreciative of our individual and collective skills and talents. And it also allowed everyone to become much more confident in stepping into their leadership and to growing into their leadership. It definitely wasn't without challenges. As a first-time facilitator of the ABCD process, it really tested my ability to be patient and gentle with myself while also remaining adaptive and responsive to the direction that the groups wanted to take their learning. It also highlighted for me that community development doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are pre-existing cultural complexities and historical complexities that exist that need to be taken into account when doing development in community. And that was explored and uncovered a number of times in our circles. And I also was occupying this intermediary space between community and the corporate world. And so I learned a lot about navigating that space and the complexities of working between two different actors in development. And I also learned through that ABCD sometimes offers much needed middle ground in order to repair relationships. I was also introducing this concept in a context of really deep historical use of a traditional needs-based development model. And so I found that at times there was a lot of ingrained deficit-based thinking and resistance to the effort and the responsibility that comes with shifting to an asset-based community-driven model. And so an example of this in our baseline meetings right at the beginning, when I was doing appreciative interviewing, even questions like, what do you absolutely love about what is going on in this project right now, was met with such negativity about the deficits in the project, about lack of funding, about lack of participation, lack of opportunity, and the struggles that everyone was experiencing in the partnership. So although ingrained dependency really existed within the project, especially at the beginning, we also saw that gradually start to lessen as we introduced ABCD, and that was replaced with really, really constructive brainstorming with community-led actions and a stronger belief that this project could actually become community-led. So I learned as well that community development isn't linear simply because people and communities are much more complex than a one-size-fits-all model of development. And so that really just built on my understanding of development. And for me personally, solidified that meaningful, impactful change-making action and development requires us to stay put and listen and come up with collaborative and innovative solutions to very specific problems. And as I learned implementing ABCD, that model for development is one way that you can draw out those innovative solutions. And so moving on briefly to sustainability, what that has meant for me in the project is that all of the work we were undertaking would help to prepare the group's move towards self-sufficiency so that eventually all of this work could be carried forward by the community. And so there was a really great and powerful moment during the fellowship where there were some external and auxiliary partners and stakeholders that had organized a carrying capacity survey to be undertaken in the community. And when the results came back to the community, it was really powerful the way they self-advocated for their role in that carrying capacity and the fact that their knowledge and input had been overlooked and that they hadn't been consulted and it wasn't in fact as participatory as they want to envision their project becoming. So that was a really powerful shift as well in that self-advocacy for the groups. And just to touch on briefly, COVID-19, this unprecedented pandemic that we're all currently living in together, it was certainly an unanticipated challenge in the project for me, and my premature departure and subsequent lockdown in Botswana meant that our production phase plans that we had organized in the last 2 months of the fellowship were unable to be implemented. And I know for some other fellows this year, we experienced this initial mourning of the loss of the intended impact that we wanted our projects to have, and also that lack of closure that we were able to have in the relationships that we were building in community. And so in those final few months of the fellowship, when I was back in Canada and thinking about the project, the disappointment for me really came from those last few workshops being unable to be implemented and the impact that they would have had in moving the project forward and solidifying that work that we had been doing in the previous months. So I just want to move past that and say that the intention of sustainability in this project was always that as I exited community, no project activities would be dependent on my involvement whatsoever. And so although I wasn't able to stay and experience those workshops and look at the growth of the project from that standpoint, I'm really, really hopeful that those networks that we built for the project will offer a really great starting place for the project to start from once the world opens up again. And that's specifically for 2 points. We had initially planned in those last few workshops to do product development, and we had also planned to do business skills and financial literacy. And so we had made a couple of connections prior to my departure that will enable those to continue to move forward. So I'm very hopeful for the sustainability of the project beyond COVID-19. So I want to touch on a couple of personal learnings as well before closing up. The first being that it's just so powerful when you invite others into your experience and into your learning. And prior to this experience, I really thought of independence as synonymous with doing things alone. And that really changed and shifted for me during this experience. And I love the Helen Keller quote and used it a number of times in our ABCD workshop. Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. And that really demonstrated what building a support network meant to me this year, and the vulnerability that it took for me in breaking down those personal barriers to allowing others experience this with me. And I also learned through coaching with Victoria how to live much more confidently and unapologetically and authentically in my values. And coming out of a university experience where your values look good on paper, having that opportunity to live them in real experience and in practice really helps to flesh out what your values are and which ones are most important and how they look like in lived experience. So finally, I also learned so much about how to consciously and appropriately and competently occupy the role of an outsider, and how to introduce topics as a catalyst for change in a respectful and appropriate way. And at the beginning of this experience, I was really comfortable in not occupying any kind of leadership role at all, because I was really hyper aware of this power and privilege that I have in working as an outsider in a community as a global development worker. And so this confidence really came out of that relationship building process, and learning how to be effectively conscious in that role and learning what the appropriate role of an outsider is. And that was really valuable moving forward in my career. So finally, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has been such a beautiful part of this experience. And I just had the most incredible team behind me and support network. So firstly, to everyone in the community, to the adult empowerment groups of Gunasocha and Betsa, to the Wilderness Safaris Community Development Team, to Travel for Impact, and also to the community translators, everyone on the ground who just welcomed me into those circles so wholeheartedly and continue to inspire me with the work that they're doing. And also to the fellowship network, to Adam, Victoria, JP, and the cohort, who have all become such incredible mentors to me and really great friends as well. To Yogesh and Farouk, who offered the most valuable advice this year and support, and also to the Pathy Foundation for offering this incredible, remarkable experience. Thank you everyone so much. And for all of you who joined today to listen, thank you for joining in. And we'll open it up for a quick Q&A now. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Jess. That was a fantastic presentation, and we're all grateful that you took the time to present for us. So it is 11:30 now. We will do a 15-20 minute Q&A period. So just a reminder that to post your questions in the either the Zoom chat or in the Facebook page, and then I will either call on you to ask your question, or I will read the question through Facebook. So please go ahead, and we actually have a question already, a couple. So let's go. YBC Cody has one from the Facebook page. So much of an ABC approach is about a shift in mindset / perspective. Were there specific moments or activities where you noticed this shift happening in community?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was using largely Cody resources to help guide how I would facilitate the ABCD process. And there were a number of activities that had a lot of impact. The first ones that I'll touch on is the asset mapping. Just that experience, even in the individual asset mapping, when community for the first time is writing down all of these assets that formerly had been overlooked in their development experience, was really powerful. And also, I think most of the community-driven action plans that were added in our ABCD workshop, in our action planning, were added as a result of that individual asset mapping and that growing appreciation for what members had to contribute independently to the project. Then there was another experience as well during one of the first sessions in that ABCD workshop. It was a language and labels activity, which goes over, what the typical traditional development language is when you describe passive actors in development. So words like poorest of the poor or marginalized, rural, or other words that create this disempowered feeling. And so then we had a brainstorming on the opposite side of what are the empowering words that we want to define this project. And that was a really significant shift, especially for the community, or sorry, for the Wilderness Safaris community development team. They really were reflective on that, about what language they had been using to describe project actors and the project as passive. And they made really great strides in how they saw the project and the language that they were using to describe everything. So those were two kind of examples. Thank you for the question, YPC Cody.
So thank you, Jess. That was a great answer. Now we'll take it back to a question on the Zoom call from Anthony. Anthony, would you like to ask this question, or would you like me to read it off the Zoom call?
No, just happy to share. So thank you. That was a great presentation, Jessica. As I understood it, the building blocks for your work were these groups that you called adult empowerment groups. And I'm just wondering if you could explain exactly, where did they come from, or what's their history or their role, and what does that say about who is in the conversation and who isn't?
Absolutely. Thank you, Anthony, for that question. So the adult empowerment groups in the villages of Gunasocha and Betsa, they were established in collaboration with Wilderness Safaris. So Wilderness operates in the safari concession where the Okavango Delta Panhandle is located. And so my understanding of how these groups came to be was through an existing corporate social responsibility program through Wilderness called Children in the Wilderness. And that program works in conservation, education, and leadership development for youth. And so these two adult groups from both villages approached Wilderness and said, we're really interested in joining as mentors to this program. We have a lot of really valuable knowledge of the plants and species in this area, and we want to join the conversation about conservation. And so that was initially how they began. And then out of future conversations, they kind of evolved into livelihoods groups, realizing that that's actually the passion that they had to uplift their community, and the passion that they had and how they wanted to involve youth was through livelihoods. And so it definitely, I did a lot of learning about what meaningful corporate social responsibility looks like, because I don't think that CSR is inherently ineffective, but when it uses a traditional model like this one had for the past 2 years, where a lot of the conflict was coming from was that these groups felt that they weren't included in what was being called a community project. So yeah, definitely thank you for that question and ability to clarify on my part. Thanks.
Okay, great question and great answer, Jess. So we'll take it back over to the Facebook page, and we have a question from Maggie Rodriguez. The question is, what were the group/community assets that the adult empowerment groups identified that surprised them the most?
Wow, good question. There were just so many so when we do individual asset mapping, we split it up between emotional assets, so heart and head assets, so intellectual, and hand assets, so physical. And so I think the ones that surprised them the most, and the one that had the largest inventory, was their hands-on skills, like things like fishing and building a makoro, which is a traditional dugout canoe, and doing fencing and building a house. Like, these are all just given skills within the community that weren't really deeply appreciated as something that they could contribute to the project. So the hands-on skills were really, I think, what enabled them to push through and think about how they could actually be using what they have to grow the project themselves.
All right, great job, Jess. That was a great question again, and a great answer. You guys are just doing great. So now we have another question from the Coady Institute on the Zoom call. Would you like to, I believe this might be Gord. Would you like to ask this question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Giovanni. That's an awesome presentation, Jessica. I'm just blown away by how well you approach this and how thoughtful and your insights were. And boy, I really wish the pandemic wouldn't have interrupted your time there, because it would have been great to see how some of these progress. But my question's really around really the issue of sort of your entry point. You mentioned earlier that that there was kind of a needs-based paradigm at work there, that the biggest challenge you faced was people sort of conditioned to focus on needs and problems when you first tried to introduce it. And I'm wondering how you overcame that. that entry point from an outsider perspective is often the most difficult part of the process, because when people are functioning in a needs problems paradigm, they're trying to second guess usually what the outsiders are bringing or want to hear. So how you pivoted from that or slowly built some trust and a different way of working, I'd be really interested to hear. In the ABC, we tend to start with an appreciative interviewing process, like not talking about any kinds of mapping right at the beginning. But I'd be interested to hear how you approached it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Gord. I love your Zoom background, bringing us all back to the Cody. Absolutely. So there were a few things. We did start with appreciative interviewing, which is kind of when that deficit-based mindset first came out so explicitly. There were a couple of things. You mentioned building trust there, and building that relationship and that trust in what this approach was really came from just being consistent and following through on what I said I was going to do as an outsider. So in those first couple of meetings, we discussed, having all of the materials be available in both written formats and visually, and having all of that translated into Setswana and using community translators. And so following through on simple things like those agreements really built the trust between myself and the groups and allowed them to be a little bit more open-minded to ABCD. And I had another point that I'm lapsing on right now, so maybe I'll continue with that question after the next one. I'll think about that. Thanks for the question, Gord.
Yeah, great job, Jess. And a great question, Gord. We'll take it back to the Facebook page and see who we got over here. We got Misco McGregor. Can you please expand upon some of the cultural/language barriers you faced while using a translator to explain the ABCD process and other workshop activities? Thank you for the question, Misco.
Absolutely, thanks, Misco. So using a translator was also a really good learning opportunity for me, especially because a lot of Setswana can't be translated exactly literally. And we also had the benefit of having a community translator that also spoke both Setswana and Hembakushu. So there were a couple of different languages that we were trying to navigate within our groups. And so working with a translator, one thing that we saw, things like assets, like even basic concept like assets would have to be explained in depth in order for it to come across in a way that was contextual. So we worked with that, but also having translated materials in a written format really helped to engage the community and address those kind of cultural language barriers.
Oh, thank you, Jess. That was fantastic. We got some really great questions coming in here. Larry, would you like to take us away on the Zoom chat? Would you like to ask the question, or I can ask it for you?
Yeah, it's fine. I'll ask my question.
Okay.
Dumela me.
Dumela, how are you?
Hey, Opela Joan.
Oh, Lesohile Sente, I think is the response to that.
Yeah, not bad. So my question is based on the fact that tourism is a gamble at the best of times in Africa. You get Ebola in Ghana or in Liberia and nobody goes to Botswana, right? People don't understand. And then in those places that you worked in, market access is almost impossible, right? So in your leaky bucket, you kind of had commodities and tourism and so on. So maybe you could give us some kind of like a background on what was the situation when you went in there? Were there existing plans about, I don't know, whatever market development or something? And, in terms of, unexpected shocks like this one, was there a kind of a plan B? Was there, okay, we had a lot of dependence on tourism. Maybe it's better to focus on honey production or something like that. So can you fill us in about pre-pandemic a little bit, and then talk about what is a post-pandemic context, an approach for them?
Absolutely, thank you. You cut out just at the end there, so I hope I'm able to answer your full question. So pre-pandemic context, the really great benefit of the design of this project is that wilderness safaris, their purchasing power because of the scale of their operations is really, really substantial. So even if the groups were to enter a production phase where they were making the most product available or possible, they would never be able to meet the needs of their corporate partner wilderness, their buying needs. And so in terms of other market access, there were a lot of other opportunities being talked about as well, expanding to other companies or expanding to other industries. And so, yeah, we didn't assess that really until, like you said, the pandemic hit, and it's had a huge financial impact in Botswana because tourism is at a complete standstill. And so in reviewing that, there are definitely opportunities within the community to do circular economy and start doing those activities more at a local scale. So for example, that milling activity that they're doing is also intended to provide a local opportunity for farmers to grind their sorghum and their cereals locally rather than taking everything outside of the community. So I think the pivot now is just that these income generation activities can also provide a lot of opportunity for services to be offered within the community and for like food needs to be met within the community before moving it to the tourism industry, if the tourism industry, like for example, right now, is in a precarious situation. So I hope that kind of touched on what your question was, Larry. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Larry. That was a great question. Jess, could you quickly just unshare your screen and we'll get to the next question. Ooh, yeah. I believe we have time for 2 more if that works for you, as we're nearing end time. So we'll take it back to the Facebook page. Hannah says, great presentation, Jess. How do you go about initially defining and talking about assets, strengths in a community that is more familiar with deficits?
Yeah, thanks, Hannah, for that great question. I think with the introduction of ABCD, the biggest mistake that I did at the beginning in those first meetings was calling ABCD by its name. And you know, a better approach to that would have been, we're gonna talk about your strengths and, you know, what resources do you have that exist in your community, rather than calling it this like really jargony term. So that definitely set us back, I think, in the conversation about what the understanding was, because I was trying to explain what the sessions would look like and gain feedback on what everyone would want for a workshop. So it was initially very hard to explain what ABCD was, because unless you undergo the process, it can seem really foreign. All of those concepts, when you're used to this traditional mindset of development of, well, we don't have this funding, so therefore we can't have this input. It can be really hard to shift that thinking. And just, I'm kind of, as I'm answering this, remembering what I was going to say to Gord, is that the best thing I think that you can do to have ABCD come across is to sit and listen first at what those needs are. You can't come in with an ABCD approach and say your needs and what you're talking about in your deficits don't matter anymore because look at what you have. There has to be a period in the beginning when you go in and allow those grievances to come out and allow the community to share what their feelings are on how they've experienced development before easing into this new approach. And so that's really really the technique, I guess, that we used at the beginning, was just saying, you know what, we're not coming in and saying that your needs and your challenges don't exist or that they don't matter.
Giovanni,
we're simply saying, you know, what are your individual, oh, sorry, Gord, did you?
No, sorry, I'll let you finish. I just wanted to ask Giovanni if I could just hot pursuit and jump right in on this.
Please go ahead and take it away.
Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off. It's the delay. I'm sorry. Absolutely fantastic answer, and you're so insightful. I had written earlier in the chat that what you don't want to hear when you go back there is that we did ABCD. What you want to hear is, look what we did, which is to your point. The one thing I would push back on is that you're right. Everybody's been conditioned this way, but that's not the natural way of doing things. In a way, what you're doing is getting people to reflect even further back to when those communities did actually operate this way, where they did drive their own development. And so it can be refreshingly liberating for communities to go through that process, but it's not easy because there's almost a deprogramming going on, both for you as the outsider, who was schooled a certain way or used to thinking about development a certain way, and for the community that's used to playing the game. So wonderful insights. I mean, I think you just have done an amazing job in such a short period of time of internalizing this approach and really honestly trying to operate using those principles. And it's not easy. It's really not easy at all. So well done. I'm sorry for jumping in, Giovanni. I just couldn't help myself.
That's okay. Everyone, obviously everyone very excited with Jessica's presentation. She did such an amazing job. So I think we'll squeeze in one quick question from, I hope I pronounced it right. Is it Mikhail?
Sorry, it's Michael, I think.
Michael, okay.
Well, yeah.
Would you like to ask this question, or?
Yeah, thanks a lot for your presentation. That was very insightful. It was around the language barrier, but I think you addressed it with the translation and other facilitated resources you use. So yeah, thanks a lot for that.
Thank you.
It's funny, Giovanni, it's Gord here again. So there was another question that I put in about wildlife trusts, and this is the ABCD process in action, is that Larry, another participant on this call, sent me a separate email with all this information about wildlife trusts in the Okavango in Botswana, because they can serve as almost community foundations, ways to mobilize local assets, financial assets, getting bits of money from operators, that can support community-driven initiatives. I was just wondering if you had anything like that.
Absolutely. So I didn't really touch on it in the presentation beyond saying it came up in our circles, but we were dealing with OCT, the Okavango Community Trust, which represents the 5 Okavango Panhandle villages. And you're quite right in saying that they're given funding through various means. This specific organization is in charge of the land tenders and leases in the concession for the safari industry in the Panhandle. So, for example, Wilderness would actually pay the lease fees to OCT. And so that was one of the complexities, was the challenges that the groups and Wilderness were having in navigating a community structure like OCT and an organization like OCT. So yeah, thank you. That was a great question.
That was wonderful. And sorry, Giovanni, I can't help myself. This is just in my wheelhouse. And the last thing I'll say, and I won't do this on any more presentations, I promise, but I have to say that Brianne and Yogesh have to be complimented here, because I know they were involved. Yogesh is a mentor, and the way in which he has taken the leaky bucket to new levels, and the way in which Brianne has obviously introduced the approach with the Pathy Fellows I'm just blown away. It's great. And I say that to the presentation we saw yesterday as well with Julia as well. Just it's very clear, and very, very pleased about that.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of echo on that note, Gord. Thank you for saying that. It's I think, just to close off this, or my input in this presentation, just that this fellowship is it prepares you for anything and everything, even pandemics that are thrown your way. And that's just really a testament to the resources at the Coady and the support networks that have been built in this fellowship experience over the past 5 years that it's existed. So I'm just incredibly grateful. And at the end of this, just really reflective on what this experience has meant to myself and the other fellows. So thank you. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you so much, Jess. It was really an inspiring presentation to see all that you've learned and how you've grown. And I always learn every time I get the chance to listen to you. So I'm sure everyone tuning in is very grateful.